Hi, everyone. I'm Joshua Price Cole, and welcome to Thursday Night Live Hop at Home Edition. Thursday Night Live is our arts infused social space, so grab a drink and gather round. Tonight, we're very pleased to present master storyteller Simon Brooks. Simon is widely known for his stories for kids and families, so tonight's a special treat stories for the grown-ups. I've known Simon a long time, so it's really a thrill for me to present him to you tonight. So turn off your cell phones, locate the nearest fire exit, no photography of any kind, and take it away, Simon Brooks.
Thanks a lot, Josh. That's great. It's an absolute joy to be here. Josh and I were actually in birthing classes together for our kids, or one of our kids anyway. So it's fun that he's introducing me tonight. So thanks everyone for joining us. I really appreciate you coming out. There's a lot of other things that can be going on. Um, so thank you. First story I'm going to kick off with is a story from the Middle East. I don't know if you know what a Hodja is, but a Hodja is a wise man. But this particular Hodja, his name was Nasruddin, and he was known as the foolish wise man. He was the kind of guy that would give riddles for answers. Well, this story is about when he and his friends were one day out in a cafe, because a lot of the men in these long ago days would settle into a cafe and they would drink that nice, thick Turkish coffee. You know the kind I'm talking about, the kind that puts hair on the palm of your hands, it's so strong. Well, they were all sitting around together and the men were just putting down their wives. Now, the Hodja at this particular point wasn't married. He was getting on in his years, but he wasn't married. He never had been married. And he said, my friends, you should stop putting down your wives. They live with you, do they not? Oh, Hodja, you don't know what it's like. You know, they expect so much of us, and yet they're not perfect at all. Yes, there's no such thing as a perfect wife, Hodja. No, there's not. There's no such thing as a perfect wife. No, but there is. There is. Well, how do you know, Hodja? You're not married. Ah, but a few years ago I did seek a wife. I heard that there were some eligible young women, and I myself was an eligible young man, and so I got in touch with these families, and I decided to visit some of them. But Hodge, you didn't marry any of them? He said, no, I didn't, but I met the perfect wife. I travelled all the way to Baghdad on my donkey. And when I arrived there, it was getting dark. I was shown into the house by the parents. Now, as you know, there are some things that I would need as any man would need. You know that I cannot cook to save my life, so I needed to find someone that could cook. And if I was going to spend the rest of my life with this woman, then I would like her to be pleasing to my eyes. And if I was going to spend the rest of my life with this woman, then she needed to be a similar intellect to myself, my friends. For if we're going to talk and talk to each other and converse with one another until our hair is grey or falling out, then we need to be of similar intellect. But Hodge, you're talking about the perfect woman. There's no such thing. No, Hodge, there's no such thing as the perfect woman. But in Baghdad, let me tell you, I found this woman. She was beautiful in the low lit candlelight. She was wonderful to be with. We spoke of many different things. We talked about poetry and philosophy. It was good. The food that she cooked, most of it she cooked. Her mother helped her with some of the pieces, I was told. But then as I was leaving, they turned the lamp up, and I saw her properly for the first time. And even though she might be beautiful to someone, she wasn't beautiful to me. And so I thought I would thank her and her family for her time, but it wasn't going to work out. You see, Hodgie, there's no such thing as the perfect woman. But there is. You just said yourself there wasn't. But there is. You see, I travelled to Cairo and met another woman. It was daylight when I got there. She was beautiful. She was intelligent. And the food that she cooked with her family, it was good food. Now, when I first got there and we first sat down to eat, conversation, she was not part of it. She was very quiet, but then she started to become more open. And she began to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And I knew that this would not work for me. You see, Hodger, there's no such thing as a perfect woman, but there is. Well, get on with it then, will you? Well, there is. You see, I travelled to Alexandria. It was a beautiful day when I got there. The sun was high in the sky. There was a breeze blowing off the water. And the two of us walked together, this young woman and myself, her family following not 20 feet behind us. Oh, her hair was dark and long and wavy. Her eyes were deep, deep brown, beautiful eyes. Her lips were full, as was her figure. She was beautiful to me. And the poetry that we talked about, oh, she introduced me to poets I'd never heard of. And we spoke of philosophy, and our philosophies were very similar. We talked and debated over some issues. Ah, she was remarkable. And when we went back to their home that night, the meal, she had prepared everything. Everything she had prepared. Her mother hadn't helped her with one little piece of the meal. And when I ate, it was as if heaven was dissolving in my mouth. I had found the perfect woman. But Hodger, you never married her. What happened? Well, the Hodger, he lifted up his coffee and took one more sip and then set the cup down and said, well, I was looking for the perfect wife. It turns out that she was looking for the perfect husband. The Hodger seeks a wife. Now, in case you hear something odd in a minute, it's my drum. It's a Bowron. When we were getting ready, the drum wasn't quite seen, and we were thinking that you wouldn't be able to see it. And so it's right here, and I am playing it. I'm not faking it. So the next story I'm going to tell you is not from the Middle East. It's a story from England. An English story, an old English story. And we know it predates the Victorian ages because in the Victorian ages, the land that I'm talking about was drained and some of it was turned into farmland. Before that, it was all marshes, swamps. Let me show you where I'm talking about. The place I'm talking about is called the Fens. And I have a map here, which I made years ago. So that's Scotland right up there. Then you got Wales over here. And then you got the southwest. This is where King Arthur and Camelot, all that lot was. But this story takes place right around here. This takes place in the Fens. Lots of streams and rivers came into this area, making it marshy, making it boggy. Now, you got to think about it. Swimming is a somewhat recent recreation. People couldn't swim in the olden days. Swimming, in fact, wasn't popular at all until the 1800s. Swimming became unfashionable. People stopped doing it, and waterways became strange and frightening places. Places where things lurked beneath. And this story takes place in that time. Now, in these long ago days, when these rivers and streams went into the fens, and there were great pools, stunted trees, bushes, tussocks of grass that grew up, marshy grass and shrubs. But it wasn't a place that you would go. You wouldn't want to. You might get lost in there, and if you got lost in there, you might drown and never come out again. The kings of this region, if they were invaded, they would bring the invading armies into those swamps, so the swamps would do half the fighting for them. Dangerous, dangerous place. Now, they say that the moon loved to look down upon the fens. Now, some people say she just liked to look at her reflection in the waters that flowed there. But this was right next to the coast. You saw the map. Why wouldn't she just look in the sea? I think she looked down on the fens favourably because she loved the place for its rugged beauty. But she heard that there were strange creatures that lived in the fens. Dark creatures, witches, bogarts, water sprites, will-o'-the-wisps. Well, of course, she never saw them. When she shone her light down, she never saw them. Why was that? Because they were frightened of her light. The light burnt their skin. Her light was so powerful, it hurt them to see it, to feel it on them. So whenever her light was its brightest, they would all hide in the bushes, hide under the trees, hide in faraway caves, wouldn't come into the fens. But when she heard about these strange creatures, she wanted to know if it was true or not. And if you need to find out if something is true or not, it's best to investigate yourself. So on one of those nights when the moon is dark, when the moon is black, when there is no light on the moon, she put herself in a cloak with a hood over it, and she flew down to the fens. And with the hood over most of her face, only a small amount of light shone out. She started to make her way in between those tussocks of grass, stepping with a foot as light as a summer's breeze. The stars were shining down. She looked around, and it was then that she started to hear the cackles. She could hear the grasses moving. She could hear the scratchings on stone. She could hear the squelch of mud. And then she heard the most terrifying scream that she had ever heard in her life. And she turned and looked when she heard this scream, and she lost her balance. When she saw, when she looked down from that small amount of light that was coming from beneath her hood, she saw that there was this great lake there. And so she wouldn't fall in it. She grabbed at the branch of a tree nearby to support herself. But that tree grabbed her back, and it held her tighter than she ever held it. She struggled, fighting with the tree. She heard the scream again and looked, and from the light that she gave off, she could see a man running through the undergrowth. And she saw that he was going to fall into that pool. And she knew that if he fell into the pool, he might very well drown. So as she struggled with this tree, she shook her head until the hood of the cloak fell off, and her light shone out bright and radiant. And those creatures, the howlings of the creatures suddenly turned to the screeches of fear, and they fled. And the man who was running, he stopped and looked down and saw the water before him, looked up and saw that beautiful, radiant face. He turned and looked behind him to see where that path was, and fled back the way he'd come, to find a way to safety. Now the moon would have cried out for help. The moon would have cried out to warn him even. But the moon, she has no voice, and she could not. And she struggled and struggled with the tree, but the more she struggled, the tighter it gripped her. And then one of the witches, braver than the other creatures, with her own cloak pulled low down over her face, with a broom in her hand, she went up carefully and flipped the hood back over the moon, and the light faded into darkness. "Oh, we have caught you, my precious. What shall we do with you?" The boggarts and the bogarts came. "Yeah, we should either tie her to a rock or something." "No, someone might find her there." "Yeah, we'll tie her to a tree." "No, somebody might find her there and release her. We don't want her light falling on us and burning us anymore. Where else can we hide her? What else can we do with her?" Well, the will-o'-the-wisps, they danced over that pool, and their light shone down through the water, and beneath the surface was a fallen tree. And where the roots were, the fallen tree had hollowed out. "Yes, my pretties, we shall put her in that tree. That tree shall be her tomb." And so the boggarts that weren't afraid of the water, they pulled the moon away from the tree, and the tree released its grasp on her. They pulled her down beneath the surface and forced her into that hollowed out trunk. And there was a rock in the pool, and they rolled that rock, sludge covered and slime covered, and sealed her in. And that tree did become her tomb. The will-o'-the-wisps, they stayed guarding it. The witches and the boggarts and the bogarts, they danced with glee. They cried with joy that the moon was no longer going to bother them and burn their skin, burn their eyes. The first people to realize that the moon was not back out were the sailors. They used the stars and the moon to guide themselves with. And then the farmers, they were looking for the moon to know when to plant their crops, when to reap their crops. And then regular people like you and I were like, "Well, where's the moon? She hasn't been out for a long time. What's going on?" Well, with no moon, with just darkness, the boggarts and the bogarts, the creatures of the night started to go closer and closer to the villages, closer and closer to the towns. People began to get frightened. Young couples with their babies would stay up late at night, making sure that their children would not be stolen and left with changelings. The old people stayed up late at night because they were frightened that the witches would come into their homes and steal them away and make them into slaves, or worse, into stew. I heard that witches like old people stew. I don't know if that's true or not. But people became frightened. They were scared to go out. Doors and shutters were bolted and locked. And then a meeting was held. A meeting was held in one of the larger towns. People from the nearby villages and the smaller towns came to this meeting in this inn. What shall we do? Where is the moon gone? Everyone cried, an uproar was going on. But there was one man in that inn, sitting there with his little daughter. You know, the kind of girl that has those bright, bright eyes. They shine even when the sun is at its brightest. They shine even when the sun has set and it's dark. Her eyes were so bright they shone like stars. She was the kind of girl that would dance everywhere. She never walked anywhere. She just danced everywhere. There was joy in her heart. And the man who was her father, he sat and listened to the conversation. He hadn't really thought much about the moon, but then he started to count back the days. He stood up. I think I know where the moon might be. And he told them what had happened to him, how he got lost in the marshlands, got lost in the fens, and how he'd run screaming. He'd heard creatures chasing after him, and then he saw this bright light, this beautiful, radiant light, just before he fell into this pool. Round, beautiful face, giving off this silver shine everywhere. I think it was the moon. I didn't think anything about it. She was standing next to this tree, but now I come to think of it, the tree was holding on to her. She was trying to escape. That's where she is. She's in the fens, in the swamps, in the marshes. But the people, they didn't believe this man. They might wonder why. He was a traveller, a tinker, a gypsy. The gypsies are known for their stories, and they thought, he's not one of us. He's a traveller. He doesn't know what goes on around here. We shouldn't trust him. Outsider. But there was one man there who was a poacher, and he knew those marshes well. Often he'd hidden there. And he wondered if that man was telling the truth. Something about his eyes. Sometimes it takes someone that's good at lying to know when someone else is lying. He went to see the wise woman of the village. She would know if this could be true. He went and sought her out and found her on the outskirts of the town. Asked her, could it be that this man is telling the truth, that the moon could be hidden in the bogs? Oh, yes, she could be hidden in the bogs, yes. You'll find her coffin there, yes, with some candles and a coffin, yes. Now, when you go, make sure you take that traveller with you. Take his daughter with you, too, and some rope as well, and put stones on your tongues. Why we put stones on our tongues? To stop you from talking. If you're talking and talking and talking, they'll know where you are. You have to be quiet. Stones on your tongues. The traveller and his daughter. You will find her where the candles and the coffin lie. The traveller was there still in the inn when the poacher got there. He'd gone to his house first and got a huge length of rope. He carried a lantern with him. Come on, we have to go. We have to find the moon, you and your daughter. I believe you. And so off they went into the marshlands. It seemed that night that the stars wanted to help them, for the stars were shining as bright as they could. Shadows were small, but they were there. There was some light. When they reached the edge of the marshes, they took off their shoes and socks, all the better to feel the paths with. They would know where the path was and where it wasn't. And off they went, close-knit, tight group, lantern in one hand, stones on their tongues so they wouldn't talk, the rope over the poacher's shoulder. The traveller told the poacher where he thought he was, where he thought he'd come from, and described the pool, and the poacher thought he knew where this was. They took a safe circuitous route to get there. And with the light of the lantern, yeah, this is the tree that she was holding on to. This is the pool that I nearly fell in. This is it, yes. Well, the will-o'-the-wisps, they danced over the water. Oh, look at those candles dancing, said the little girl. Look at them dancing on the water. Candles, aye, those are will-o'-the-wisps. Now don't go straying. They'll try and take you away and take you into the bogs. You might not be seen again. Stay close to us. The poacher took the rope off his shoulders and tied one end around his waist and tied another piece of the rope to her wrist to keep her safe so she wouldn't walk off. And then her father tied the other end of the rope around his waist. They knew they had to get into the water, but as he held the lantern up, he saw that it was this log submerged. The candles and the coffin. It looks like a coffin. This is it. He gave the poacher the light, and he held it as the tinker moved into the water getting up over his ankles, up to his knees, up to his waist before he came to that fallen log. He stepped up on it. It was slippery, being underwater for so long, slimy. He tried to grip what was left of the bark with his toes, steadily made his way back to where the roots were. Tried to push the rock away from the roots, but that too had been underwater for so long. That was covered in slime and was slippery. He called over to the poacher. The poacher broke a branch off and threw it to the tinker, who caught it, and he used it as a lever to push that rock, slipping and sliding though he was. He pushed the rock, and when it started to move, he was able to get his foot behind the rock and push the rock away, and it slowly sank into the mire, into the mud of the pool, and a light shone out. He looked down, and he saw this face appear. This face looked up. It was the moon's face. She looked up at the man she had saved, the man who looked down on her, who was now saving her. She floated out and then up into the sky she went. Her light bright shone around, and all of a sudden they heard the screams. They hadn't realized how close the witches and the boggarts and the bogarts, the water nymphs, the sprites, the will-o'-the-wisps had come to them to try and get them in their clasp. But they ran screaming as the light burnt their skin and burnt their eyes. They untied the rope once the man was back on shore, and they made their way hastily back to the inn. People were already celebrating. They had seen this bright ball of light fly up into the sky. They were celebrating. The poacher came in and said, "The man you didn't trust, this man and his daughter, they were the ones that saved the moon. These people, these outsiders, you should be grateful for." So the people welcomed these outsiders, these tinkers, these gypsies. They celebrated, gave them food, they watered them, they accepted them into their community. And the moon? Well, the moon, they say, still shines brightest over the fens. Now it's not because she likes to look at the rugged beauty of the place, but she shines brightest there because she knows of the dangers that lurk in those marshes, and she doesn't want anyone to be trapped as she was. The story of the dead moon. How long have we got? 24 minutes. We've got plenty of time. Are you enjoying the stories? I hope so. It's very strange doing this virtually because there's no audience here to cheer me on or say, "No, you messed that bit up," or "Get off your rubbish." So I'm hoping you're enjoying yourselves and that you haven't got too much else to do, and that whatever else you were going to do was worth leaving to come and listen to these stories. And thanks for supporting the Hop Stop as well. That's great. Thanks for being here. So I've got 2 more stories for you. The next story is a story from India, although there are many, many, many different variants. And how do we know it's from India? Because there's a tiger in it. And where do tigers come from? Well, I know they come from Siberia as well. Or do they? The Siberian tiger comes from Siberia? I would imagine it does. Now this story, sorry, all my stuff fell on the floor. This story is about a soldier and his wife. And this is a long, long time ago. Very long time ago. And this soldier, he was one of those guys that was like the life of the party. He knew all the best songs, he knew all the best jokes, he knew all the best stories. He wasn't shy of attention. And his wife loved him for that. She was quiet, but she basked in the light that he shone around him. But when he came back from war, he was a very, very different person. He was withdrawn. He seemed to shrink into himself. He didn't tell stories or jokes anymore. He didn't sing with everybody else. He would just sit and listen. His wife, she loved him dearly. And she missed the man that she had married. The man that went off to war. She wanted him back. And she tried to coax him out. She tried to get him to come out to her and be the man he used to be. But it seemed impossible. So she went to see the wise woman of the village. I know there's a lot of wise women in these stories. And why are there wise women in these stories? Well, it's easy. There weren't any wise men. I mean, there are wise men, don't get me wrong. I got into trouble for saying that once. There are wise men out there. But the wise old women, well, they last longer than wise old men. And because they last longer, they become even wiser. So that's why they always go to the wise old woman. And the wise old woman, well, this wife, she wanted to get her husband back. Surely you can make a potion. Surely you can create a potion for me to bring my husband back. And the wise old woman looked into the flames of the fire, and she thought, and she thought. And she said, there is one way that you can bring your husband back. And what is that? How can I bring my husband back? Well, you'll need to go and find 3 tiger whiskers and bring them back to me. 3 tiger whiskers. I think I can do that. 3 tiger whiskers that have come from a live tiger. A live tiger. I have to pull the whiskers from a live tiger and bring them to me. If you can do this, then I might be able to help your husband. Tigers are big animals. I mean, they're huge animals. If you've never seen a real life tiger, I mean, their heads are massive. Their paws, they are big animals. This was not a huge Amazonian woman. This was a young, thin, not terribly tall woman. How would she get 3 whiskers from a live tiger? Well, she thought about this. She cooked some rice, put lots of fat in the rice. She made these rice balls. And then she took that rice out into the forest in a little bag. Out into the forest she went. She looked for trails, for clues of where a tiger might live. And she thought she found a place. She thought she found the lair of a tiger. And so she took this small bundle of rice balls soaked in fat, and she set them where she thought the entrance of this tiger den was. And then she went and hid in the trees, and she waited. And she waited until the sun started to sink. And she knew the forest was a dangerous place to be at night, especially with wild cats. So she made her way home. And the next day she made more rice balls, soaked them in fat, and took them back to that same lair, and the rice balls were gone. Maybe this is the right place, she thought. And she set the rice balls outside the entrance of this lair, hoping that this was a tiger. And then she went in the woods and waited and hid. Again, she did not see the tiger. She did this day after day. And after about a week and a half, 2 weeks, just as she was about to leave, she heard something coming out of the cave. And when she looked, there was a tiger. It sniffed the rice balls and then looked around, and it seemed that it turned and looked directly at her, hidden though she was in the brush. It emitted a low, rumbling growl. If you've ever heard a tiger growl, you can feel it through your entire body. Very carefully and quietly, she shrank back further into the trees and made her way home, but she knew she was in the right place. She knew she'd found the tiger's lair. And day after day, week after week, she would leave those rice balls right outside the lair. And the tiger would come out and sniff and look at her, and then started to eat them. Week after week after week, she brought those rice balls and set them outside, and then she stood in full view of the tiger, and the tiger looked at her and emitted that growl that went through her, but she didn't run. She didn't hide. She just stood there and looked at the tiger right in the eye, and the tiger looked back before dropping its head and eating the rice balls. Months passed, and she started to get closer and closer and closer to the tiger lair. And then one day, with a heart in her mouth, she sat outside with the rice balls right next to her at the entrance. She could see the tiger in the shadows. It emitted its growl, and it got closer and closer, and it got bigger and bigger as it got closer to her, and the growl just went all the way through her body. She thought that her days were over. But the tiger just bent its head and ate the rice balls. Well, a few weeks later, she had the rice balls in her lap, in her hand. And she offered them to the tiger, and the tiger ate them. And then the tiger laid its head on her lap, and she dared to pet it. She gently touched its ear and its head, but then she thought she didn't want to push her luck, and she left. But this began to happen more and more often. It would lay its head on her lap, and she would stroke the tiger. And then one day it fell asleep. And very carefully, she took one of the tiger's whiskers, huge, long, wiry whiskers, and pulled it out. Well, the tiger leapt up and roared. She stood up and backed away, but she did not run. She just faced the tiger. The tiger turned around and went back in its lair, and she slowly made her way home. She had one tiger's whisker. It was a long time before she even dared to take a second one. It took a few more weeks for that tiger to come out and lay its head on her lap again. But she got two. And then another month passed. She now had a third tiger whisker. And she went back to the wise woman of the village. She showed her the 3 whiskers from a live tiger. How did you do this? You have brought me what I asked for. A live tiger, not one that you found dead. Well, how long have I been gone? How long since I last visited you? Almost a year. And here you are with 3 tiger whiskers. So can you make that potion for me? Well, the old woman took those whiskers and she threw them into the fire. And that woman, horror over her face, watched them flare up and then vanish into dust. What have you done? I spent so much time getting those whiskers from a live tiger, and you just... Where is my potion? My dear, if you can get 3 whiskers from a live tiger, then you can bring your husband back. You don't need a potion. The wife, she saw the wisdom of this old, wise lady who lived at the edge of the village. And it was with hope in her heart that she returned home. Then it took a while. It was probably longer than a year, but she started to bring her husband out of himself. And after time, she saw him smile and laugh And then she knew she had won. She knew that she had brought him back when she caught him singing one day. And I like to think that they lived at peace with one another. They lived at peace. The tiger's whiskers. I really like that story. It's one of my favorites. I don't tell it very often. And the first time I heard that story, I mean, I'd seen it written down. There's, like I said, there's different variants of it. There's another version which has a lion in it, and it's lion whiskers that it has to get. But an old friend of mine, a colleague of mine called George Radcliffe, I first heard that story told by him, and the way that he told it was just it was like music to my heart, and I knew that I had to tell that story. So I need to send out a shout out to George Radcliffe for sharing that story with me, and a lot of other people too. But remarkable story. Anyway, the next story isn't going to be quite so deep as the previous two, and we're going to go back to England for this story as well. Now, this story's changed a lot. This story originally came from a man called Taffy Thomas, who I had the absolute pleasure and joy to meet in England this March. I flew over there to see some of my family right as this mess was just kicking off, and got back in time to be here safely and soundly. But I got to see and meet and hang out with Taffy Thomas. And I had a clue that this story was probably from him originally, but had changed a lot, and he confirmed that yes, it was. And the version that he tells is very different. The version I tell is the version that I heard from another storyteller. And I really like this story, and I hope you do too. You see, there was once upon a time, a very long time ago, a king and a queen who had 3 children. Now, sadly, the queen died not long after the birth of the 3rd child. And the king, being the king, he wasn't really sure how to raise children. That wasn't really his thing. That would have been, the people of the court and his wife. But he wanted to have a hand in rearing his children, and so he decided that he would teach his 2 sons exactly the same thing that he would teach his young daughter, the young daughter being the youngest of the 3 kids. And he taught his young daughter the exact same things that he taught his older sons. So the sons were taught how to do poetry and needlework. The daughter was taught how to ride horses and archery, sword fighting, chess. They all learnt the same tools. They all learnt the same skills. They all grew up together. Well, the king was getting on in his years. He hadn't started at a young age. He'd started at an old age. And the king's advised, "Hey, your majesty, we're getting so old these days, you should really choose a successor to the throne. We're assuming that you would like your eldest son to take over once you've passed away." "Well, I'm not sure if I could pick one of my children over the others. No. I've raised them all the same. They have very similar skill sets. I could not choose one over the other. But your majesty, you have to pick one. You have to choose the eldest son." "No, I know what I shall do. I shall set a task for them all to complete. Same task. Where are my clerics? Have them come in. Have them write down what I am about to say." So the clerics came in, and they wrote down what the king said. And what the king said was, the task his children had to do was to fill the castle with something. Every single room, from top to bottom, from left to right, from front to back, had to be filled with something. It didn't matter what. Every single room. Well, the king eventually passed away, and the task was set for the children. The eldest son can go first, and then if he completes the task, then we don't have to do it for the other 2. Yes, we'll do that, yes. So they were given enough time to think about what they wanted to do, and the eldest son made a plan. And he went into the nearest towns and villages, and he bought feathers, pillows, mattresses. And then on a prescribed day, he had the servants take all of these mattresses, all of these feathers, and all of these pillows throughout the castle into every single room. And at 12 noon, when the clock struck, he had them all rip open the bags of feathers, rip open the pillows and the mattresses, and toss the feathers into the room to fill the room from the top to the bottom, from side to side, from the front to the back. And the advisors had to run around the room. Oh, yes, this room's full. On to the next one. No, this room's full. But as they got into the third and fourth and fifth room, the feathers were beginning to settle. And they saw that there were places under tables and chairs where no feathers went anywhere. Never mind. The middle brother, the middle child, the younger brother, he'll figure it out, and then we don't have to do the daughter at all. Yes, we don't have to bother with the daughter. He'll figure it out. So that night, the middle brother had a plan. He had it all arranged, and he had candles taken to every single room throughout the castle. And as soon as the sun set, he had all of the servants light the candles in every single room throughout the whole castle, even the topmost tower. And the clerics and the advisors, they ran through the castle. The first couple of rooms, they were filled with light, but as they made their way further and further into the castle, they started to realize that there were still shadows under tables, shadows behind cabinets that were standing up. And by the time they got to that topmost tower, the flame gutted out, and the room was cast into darkness. Well, if the eldest two boys can't do it, then I'm sure the daughter can't. And now the eldest boy has had some more time to think about what he can do, and then he can become king when he figures it out. Well, the next day, just after dawn, it was the daughter's turn. She had every single door, every single window open. Tapestries were moved out of the way of windows. Everywhere was open. The advisors and the clerics, they gathered there. Well, what's going on? Her maid came forward and set down in her hands a cloth. When she opened up the cloth, inside the cloth was a flute. And she put the flute to her lips and began to play. Well, whatever is she doing? One of the maids looked at the clerics and said, she is filling the castle with music. Oh, well, we should check the rooms then. Strange thing to do, fill it with music. How on earth can you do that? And so off the clerics and the advisors ran from room to room to room. They hid under beds. I can still hear it. They hid into closets. I can still hear it. They ran up to the topmost tower, and they could still hear the music. Well, the clerics and the advisors had to agree that the youngest daughter had won. For she had filled the whole castle not just with music, but they realized that she'd filled the castle with love and compassion. And so she became the next ruler. And they say that she ruled the kingdom well, and that the kingdom remained at peace for all of her days. The cleverest tune. Well, that brings us right up to the last moment. And what I would like to do is to again thank you very much indeed for coming out and spending your time with us all here at the Hop Stop at home. Really, really appreciate it. I really appreciate you coming out to see me. I appreciate you supporting the Hop Stop and all it does. And I hope you continue to do so. Thanks very much indeed for being here tonight. And stay safe. And remember, keep your distance. Good night. Bye.
Simon, thank you so much. That was fabulous. Thank you all for joining us at Thursday Night Live tonight. I just want to mention that Simon is doing stories for children tomorrow at 1 o'clock and Saturday at 11 a.m. Thank you and good night.